Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 14th, 2020, and we are 50 days away from the 2020 presidential election in November. So today we're going to be talking about favorability ratings and comparing the numbers where Joe Biden stands today versus Secretary Hillary Clinton's numbers back in 2016. Also, we are working with a very different electorate, and a lot less voters disapprove of both candidates compared to 2016. We'll talk about that even more in depth in just a couple of minutes. But face value, Joe Biden is a much more likable candidate than Hillary Clinton was. In fact, Joe Biden is the only, Democratic nominee that has been doing pretty well in terms of approval. He's plus 3.3% nationwide in terms of favorable versus unfavorable view of him as a candidate. And for Donald Trump, he still remains in the negative double digits at negative 13%, which means Joe Biden has a 16-point advantage over Donald Trump in terms of favorability rating. Now, in 2016, Hillary Clinton did have a lead over Donald Trump, but it was only by 8.4% on Election Day, and she was still disapproved of by roughly the same numbers that Donald Trump was disapproved of back 4 years ago. And if you're wondering why Donald Trump's approval rating has risen from 2016, it's because he has actual responsibilities now, and a lot of people may approve of what he's doing as president and will confuse that with, their favorable rating of Donald Trump as a candidate, which is why it isn't super important to say that Biden would win based purely on approval rating just because Biden has no real responsibilities. But I would say in a time where we're going into an economic collapse amidst a global pandemic, I don't think you do want to have any responsibility for anything that's happened in the past couple of months, running into this election. So for Biden to be at a 3.3% positive nationwide, we are starting to see that following the DNC and the RNC, only Joe Biden raised his approval. He came off as a much more genuine candidate, and to be completely honest with you, the RNC and the DNC were completely different. The RNC was mainly focused on Donald Trump. So was the DNC, I'll tell you that much, but for the RNC, it seemed to be very much focused on Donald Trump, but it didn't do anything to rebuild his character. For the DNC, I think a lot of what we saw was personal stories. I think every single night, we saw numerous stories from voters that had personal connections to Joe Biden. And that's the main focus, and that was the main focus of the Democratic Convention. It was to push Joe Biden's image further than what people view him as face value. In 2016, they did dabble a little bit into that in the 2016 DNC held in Philadelphia, but Hillary Clinton was mainly there on the final night giving a very politician-esque type speech. Joe Biden seemed to be a much more genuine and much more personable candidate. And also, based on what was displayed in 2016 versus 2020, the main focus was rebuilding character for Biden this election, whereas 2016, it wasn't focused too much on that. It was more inspirational speeches from notable Democrats, a lot less about Clinton as a candidate, more so about attacking Donald Trump. And that's not to say that DNC didn't do that for Trump, but they definitely had a very good balance this time around compared to 4 years ago. If we're looking at the numbers, like I said, face value, Biden is doing very well in terms of approval, which is actually reflecting on the national average. Biden being up 7.1% nationwide is no fluke. He's held this lead for the past couple of months, largely because of the fact, number one, he's already at 50%, which means even if Trump makes up the margin, wins the remaining undecided 6% of voters on this, number map, pretty much Biden still wins the popular vote. And I will say that Biden is likely to carry more than 50.6% of the popular vote. Trump's numbers will probably raise, considering that undecided voters may end up splitting even 50-50. But you do have to realize that Joe Biden is doing considerably better than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. And if we're looking at where Joe Biden stands in terms of approval, I think there's a very significant difference. Also, let's go ahead and take a look at where undecided, unfavorable voters voted 4 years ago. So what do I mean by that? Well, in terms of voters that disapproved of both candidates in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton lost them by 17%. Donald Trump had a 17-point movement over Hillary Clinton, meaning roughly 50% of the voting bloc, the plurality of the voting bloc, said they were voting for Trump even though they disliked both candidates. And that is a completely different story in 2020. But as you can see on the map, in terms of those who are, not the map, on the bar graph, or I guess the statistical, I can't speak today. In terms of what's being shown on the screen, when we're talking about Hillary Clinton's favorability rating, it wasn't too high. Only 41% of voters said that they had a favorable view of Hillary Clinton, but she won those voters by 97%. The same goes for Donald Trump. When we're talking about who approved of him as a candidate, he won 97% of those voters. But in terms of the voting bloc that really ultimately decided the election, those who viewed both candidates unfavorably, that was 18% of the voting group, Donald Trump won them by 17%. 17%. And I will say, looking at the 2020 numbers, it's a lot worse. This was held in April. It's gotten a lot worse for Trump at this point. Biden held a 32-point lead amongst the same unfavorable voting group from 2016, except this time around now, a couple of months later, or more than a couple of months, a few months later, Biden holds a 50-plus point lead over Donald Trump amongst this group. What does this mean in terms of voters? Well, first things first, look at the voting groups from 2016 and 2020. Two things are consistent. The Trump favorable voters overwhelmingly vote for Trump. I mean, we're talking about 97% over Hillary Clinton. Same thing goes for, Clinton over Trump. And the same thing is happening here with Biden and Trump. 95% lead over Biden in terms of those who favor Trump, 96% lead in terms of those who favor Biden. And then if we're looking at the unfavorable for both candidates, this is where Biden is really going to hurt Trump. Looking at this group up here, a lot of these unfavorable people from 2016, I mean, the group has reduced down from being 18% down to 11%, so that's a 7-point difference. A lot of them could have moved over into the favorable Joe Biden column or the favorable Donald Trump column, which means they're being pushed into this area that's 96, has a 96-point lead for Trump, or 96-point lead for Biden, or a 95-point lead for Trump. And I think that's super important because when we're looking at these states that had a very large voting bloc that disliked both candidates, 20% in Michigan, 17% in Pennsylvania, 22% in Wisconsin, what were these vote differences? Well, Trump won these voters very solidly, 20% or higher. In Michigan, he won this disliked both voting group by 21%, 25% in Pennsylvania, and 37% in Wisconsin. The fact that Biden is now up 50+% amongst this group, I think is super significant. When we're looking at the vote difference, 203,000 votes. 203,000 votes when 11,000 decided the overall result. 262,000 in Pennsylvania. 44,000 decided the election. In Wisconsin, 242,000, 22,000 decided the actual statewide vote. So these three key states that Hillary Clinton lost in 2016 will be crucial to Biden's victory. And the fact that Biden is now, demolishing Trump amongst this disliked both group is super, super significant. And what we're going to see on Election Day is that, yes, there still will be a large percentage of Americans, or at least 1 in 10 voters, that dislike both Trump and Biden, but we're seeing something completely different, a flip-flop from 2016, where Trump won them by 17%, Biden is up by 32% in April, according to Quinnipiac University, and now by 50%. 50. I mean, it's not too unreasonable to imagine 50 when Trump won the Wisconsin group by 37%, so it's not exactly super unrealistic, just that number is huge. And Biden is going to do so much better than Hillary Clinton because these voters that dislike both candidates, had Hillary Clinton been a more liked candidate, they could have easily been grouped amongst this favorable group that easily voted for her because they liked her. Had they had a positive view of Hillary Clinton, she would have won the 2016 election. If she was able to hold on to her favorability rating from the past, I mean, when we look at a lot of these numbers, when we look where she was throughout her entire service through the Obama administration, I mean, we're talking about favorable plus 34. Even right up to when she announced right around this point, she was still plus 5, and then she dipped down to around even. If she had remained around even, she still probably would have won the election. But then it just kept growing and growing in terms of the dislike for her as a candidate, and she ended up at an unfavorable plus 12.6% nationwide on Election Day. 2 years prior to that, I mean, it was only, 7, 8, which is still a pretty bad position to be in. But throughout, her entire career, she was always approved of. Only once, we started getting close to the 2016 election was when the Republicans started rolling out ads ahead of her even announcing her campaign. And then it ended up working because Donald Trump was elected president on November 8th, 2016. So for Trump, I will say that his approval rating has improved from 2016 based off of where it was, but he has actual responsibilities now. And the President Trump job approval rating is something we also need to look at very heavily because Trump really needs this to increase. What we're seeing is that it's steadily increasing. So this is good news for Trump. But unfortunately for him, while this is steadily increasing, we're not seeing too much happen on the national average. Until we see Biden go down to a 3-point lead nationwide, it really isn't too much turbulence. There really isn't too much turbulence enough to say this election has changed so drastically that, Biden is no longer the clear front runner to win the election. But I will say these 2020 favorability rating numbers are not looking good for Biden, especially with all of these, results from 2016 that ultimately gave Donald Trump the victory. And amongst these same groups, it is very likely, very, very likely that Biden has now won them over, which means that these Altogether, more than 500,000 votes could end up going for Biden, when really all he needs to improve on is 11,000 votes in Michigan compared to 203,000, 44,000 in Pennsylvania compared to 262,000, 23,000 in Wisconsin compared to 242,000. It's insane. The numbers that Trump won these groups by was enough to put him over the top and an additional couple 100,000 votes. But this time around, it's gone from being plus 17 for Trump in 2016 down to negative 32 for Trump in 2020. So that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. I'm so excited. We're 50 days out from the November general election, so make sure you get your countdowns ready. We're almost a month out. Again, thank you all so much for watching. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2020 election predictions. And I will see you all in a roughly 6 to 7 hours.